Hi, and welcome to Module 2. This one is called Preparing for Play, and I will go over what is in this module in just a moment. But first, I realized when reviewing the slides that I never added in the first module that when I refer to early childhood or early childhood education, I am referring to children in the ages of birth through age 8. Now, most resources or a lot of resources refer to kindergarten and preschool. But the National Board and several resources that I have, and the book that I have referenced several times, Purposeful Play, they refer to early childhood as being up to the age of 8. And Purposeful Play actually even goes into some things for third through fifth grade as well. So I just wanted to clarify that when I speak about early childhood education, I am referring to preschool, kindergarten, first grade, and second grade, and that developmentally these strategies are appropriate. So let's move on and go to Module 2. So, Module 2 is called Preparing for Play. And what we are going to cover in this module is 3 elements of implementing play-based strategies into your early childhood classroom. And that is why I wanted to clarify what is considered early childhood, because I refer to it and I wanted to make sure that was clear. So the first thing we're going to talk about is tools which are needed to support a play-rich classroom, and some considerations about setting up your classroom. The second thing is how to structure free choice time to support learning. And that is something we're going to call workshop structure. And you're going to see that in the coming slides. And then finally, we're going to talk about the teacher's role in children's play and what that looks like. So one of the first things when we start talking about tools is toys. And Dr. Elkin, who wrote The Power of Play, he wrote a very interesting chapter about toys and the concerns. And the first thing that he talked about was that having too many toys around all the time and receiving new toys all the time makes it harder for children to develop attachments and to engage in a truly imaginative play. And his discussion there was centered around the fact that in the past, it has been traditional that children receive toys and gifts on their birthdays and at holidays like Christmas. But now, with the availability of toys and the low cost of toys, it is easier than ever for kids and for parents and adults to purchase and give toys to kids. So the more toys that they get, the less often they play with them, the harder it is for them to develop attachments, and they kind of get bogged down in the items that they have. Some of these items are battery-operated toys. That's the first thing that he was talking about, which grab a child's attention and they keep them occupied, but they really have little to no developmental value. Those little noise-making, button-pushing games. My daughter has a pretend remote control that you push buttons and it sings. They really have no developmental value, according to this doctor of psychology. Now, sensational toys, this one I thought was very interesting. Sensational toys, young children take comfort and pleasure in the feel of cotton, wood, and metal. Now, if I think about my manipulatives in my classroom, a lot of them are plastic. I do have some wood blocks, and Bridges in mathematics utilizes the bundles of wooden sticks, which is great. But it's something to consider having items that are also cotton and metal. Now, the next thing says microchip toys. Microchip toys are things with computer chips, which is interesting because I know that children know technology better than we do sometimes, but they really can't understand the technology behind the toys, meaning why it works. So there's a disconnect between actions and reactions. I know that when I touch this button on the iPad, it opens the app, but when the app isn't working, I don't know why that is. So that causes decreased problem solving. With less complex toys, children can figure out what was wrong or how it got broken. But computerized toys are not as easy to fix, and therefore it can be really frustrating and easily discarded. So that's just something to consider with all of the technology that we have available to us. Character toys is the next one we're going to talk about, which I found very interesting that initially they were created to help reinforce positive role models. So figures of Abe Lincoln, Mickey Mouse was a fantastical character, but he represented the character values of friendship, kindness, and generosity. So superheroes like Spider-Man, Batman, and Superman, they all represented forces of good. So they were all models of good things. And that was where character toys stemmed from. But now we are actually, they're more created towards the idea that children are consumers. For example, Barbie, in her first several years, she had 100 new outfits come out a year for several years, because that's what sold. Her new outfits sold. So that children are being considered consumers, and so therefore the character toys aren't really sold for educational or developmental purposes. They are solely to make money. And so it's just something to consider when you're thinking about toys. They are very high interest. Now, skills toys. Skills toys are miniature implements representing those that adults use. So things, for example, the list down below says toy weapons, housewares, cars, etc. My daughter has a play cleaning set, so a broom and a mop. Toy model cars, Hot Wheels, Easy Bake Oven would be considered a skills toy. When I say Hot Wheels, that was incorrect. I mean like a remote control car. So these things were typically assigned gender roles in history. So girls were often given the houseware toys like childcare toys, baby dolls, typewriters, which would instill homemaker attitudes and skills and values in them. Whereas boys were given things like radio building kits, model airplanes, trains, and cameras. So those are engineering, wood burning, chemistry kind of oriented toys. Now we're moving away from the gender assignment of toys. And these skills toys are slowly being replaced with computer and microchip toys, which is great because they can learn tech skills and things like coding. However, they aren't given the understanding of how these things actually work. So that's something to consider with the coding and with the skills toys to help you build a computer or however those might look. And finally is educational toys. These are usually created for preschool age children, things like Leapfrog, educational CDs and DVDs. Early childhood is a time of rapid growth and development, and some people believe that, or some experts believe that it is very good to take advantage of this. Others do not believe in the ability to develop. The ability to develop is enough to force complex learning. So professionals really disagree whether or not these are valuable tools. So those are some considerations about toys. When you're considering your classroom, think about your space. Is there enough room for the children to move around and use the materials available so that they're not invading each other's space, personal space? Perhaps a shelf needs to be moved out so that there's more room in the block area. That way kids are not knocking down each other's structures if they're building things. Maybe the library area is too large and needs to be defined to a smaller, cozier space. That's the second bullet point. Is the area too large and undefined so that the children do not feel a sense of purpose? Another idea, maybe the class meeting space needs to be, or the class meeting needs to be utilized to discuss problems that arise during play. Children can give their ideas for rearranging the space, and that can help you in designing that and addressing any disagreements that might be happening. Quantity of materials talks about how many materials you have available. And some questions you might ask yourself is, are there enough materials available in the area for the number of children who want to play? are you going to be able to have successful groups with the amount of materials that you have? Perhaps too many puzzles available in the manipulative area might lead to children dumping them out and having a hard time finding the pieces that fit the right puzzle frame. So that's just an example of the idea of quantity of materials. So you giving a smaller number might help. Another consideration is, are there very popular things that are causing disagreements? So, for example, maybe the light blue airplane that the boys fight over every single day, even though there's a green one, a red one, and a purple one, maybe you should put the blue one away for a while. Another thing to consider, are there too many materials? That was that puzzle example. Are there too many materials so children are overwhelmed by the choices? So perhaps maybe having multiple copies of favorite books should be available in the library might help with the disagreement idea. I skipped that note, I'm sorry. But having too many materials can also be an issue. Engaging in interesting materials means, do you have things that are going to engage your students? So which materials are the children finding most interesting? What are they not using appropriately? I had a dress-up station in my second grade classroom this last year, and as much fun as it was, there were definitely items that didn't get used properly, so I had to put away the masks for a while. Are there multiple ways for children to use the materials? It's a good idea to have materials that are open-ended, because if you have a Lego block that is specifically painted like a house and the kids can only use it as a house, that isn't engaging their deeper level thinking. Not the best example, but just kind of an idea. So some other things to think about in engaging materials, maybe different writing materials can be available to get children motivated to be in the writing area. Different kinds of paper, like lined paper, stationery, note cards, index cards, different kinds of writing tools, pens, pencils, markers, crayons. Those kinds of things can help encourage kids to be interested in the writing center. You can also change out materials in different areas. One of the situations that they discussed in this book, Saving Play, was if you have a sensory table, you can move dry sand and replace it with wet sand or rice to switch things up. It says maybe if you have a science area, it could be better if the children can go on a nature walk outdoors and collect leaves and sticks and other items and decide how to use them. Making changes to the environment is a way to facilitate and support high-level play. So it's an important teaching strategy and part of everyday life in an early childhood classroom. Just making sure that you're adapting your environment to support their play situations. Here in Purposeful Play by Mraz, Preselli, and Tyler, they gave a list of what they call playful tools, also can be called open-ended tools. These include blocks, cardboard, paper, markers, color pencils, staplers, shells, metal or wood items, hollow blocks, fabric, paints, scissors, crayons, loose parts, rocks, and familiar items from adult workplaces. Kids love open-ended materials. Play isn't made by better toys, it's made better by possibilities. These items, it sounds like a craft station, but the idea of these items is that they are open-ended. A crayon can be used to create art. It can be used to make a sign for a story that they're telling. A crayon can be a prop for a play city that they've created. Loose parts can encompass a number of things. Shells can be used for counting. They can be used for an art project. They can be used for making patterns. Whatever the kids can come up with, This leaves things open for their imagination and their ideas. Oh, and I forgot to mention one thing about these open-ended tools is in manipulating open-ended materials like pipe cleaners, children can also solve problems and think flexibly. So, kind of like I was saying, they are able to come up with their own ideas and change what they're thinking. Other ideas that you can add to this is math manipulatives you can keep out throughout the day. Another recommendation is that you keep these things in clear storage bins so that kids can see what are in them to choose what they want to play with. They also recommended a book. It's called Not a Box and Not a Stick. So the title is Not a Box, Not a Stick. And I tried to see if I could find a copy of that, but haven't managed to get my fingers on one yet. But that is a book about open-ended tools. So, workshop structure. This is when we're going to get into talking about structuring free choice time. The figure that you see there is a child choosing which material center he wants to be part of. You see that there's an imagination station. There is a station called cardboard. There's an art station, a block station, and I believe that says sand. And here the quote from Mraz, Preselli, and Tyler, which is the authors of Purposeful Play. They say, children should have time set aside purely for play when they can pursue their own interests with materials they choose. By attaching a workshop structure to these times, we can teach into children's play in powerful ways. So, students do get recess. That is something that a lot of people like to bring up when we're talking about play. But there should also be opportunities to play in the classroom where the teacher can facilitate, observe, and teach into play, and that's where workshop structure comes in. So this is an example of workshop structure, a typical choice time session and what it can look like. So typically, it would look like 1 to 2 minutes where children choose a center or play theme. So that's where they would get to choose an item on the choice board. They can place their names for the day of the week. It can happen first thing in the morning. It can happen during the focus lesson. The focus lesson would be about 3 to 5 minutes. So you're not going to teach for 25 minutes about something here. You're going to do a brief instruction on a strategy that supports children in play. Talking about these strategies is going to come later in modules 3 and 4 when I talk about social development and using play in academics. But the general idea is that the children choose a play theme. The teacher teaches a brief lesson in the meeting area. The kids get 3 minutes to plan. This can be oral or written. It happens with the children who choose to play in the same area. So whoever wants to play in blocks is going to plan with the kids who want to play in blocks as well. They're going to plan together. It can happen in the meeting area before they go off, or it can happen in their station. Children plan for the use of the materials, storylines, or characters they want to use. If you want to see more, 2 of the authors wrote a different book called A Quick Guide to Boosting English Acquisition in Choice Time. And that's another resource. Focus lessons, like I said, are going to be discussed in later modules. This particular book talks about empathy, cooperation, planning, connecting to academics, and problem solving as focus lesson topics. Here is next is work play time. They call it work because really the children are learning during this time as well. 30 to 35 minutes. We will get into timing in a few minutes. But if you see that and go, what? That's a long time. The children are in different play areas. They stay in one area for the whole length of time. My second graders had a very hard time with that last year. But if you establish things early, it is manageable. The teacher moves from group to group to talk, observe, take notes, and offer tips. Note that teacher role. She's not taking a break. He's not taking a break or using this time as grading time. I know that my choice time was on Fridays. And sometimes I would sit down and color with one of the kids or sit at my desk and take a breather for a few minutes. That's not what this is intended for. This is intended for the teacher to be moving around and observing and helping the kids. If it's the last day in a center, children clean up fully. If they are returning to the center, children neaten and organize as needed. Ideally, kids should be allowed to continue their projects over several days, which is something that takes time to organize and set up, but ideally that would be able to do so. Finally, 3 to 5 minutes can be used for sharing, where the students gather in the meeting area and they can share what they did, worked on, or observed. This time could be used for teaching something new, to solidify the teaching from earlier, or provide examples of something to try based on what you've seen in the play situations. So in purposeful play, the authors suggest using a similar structure before and after recess as well. So talk about what you're going to play at recess before you go. Maybe do a quick focus lesson. Hey, I noticed last week or yesterday you and Donna had trouble with this ball. Let's practice how we might share. And then after recess, sharing how that went and firming up your lesson or teaching something new that came out of that recess. When to utilize free choice time. So earlier I said that we would talk about timing. In that workshop structure, you saw that they recommended 30 to 35 minutes for the play. Here, it is showing you that in pre-kindergarten, they suggest that students have 45 to 60 minutes of free choice time 5 days a week. Kindergarten is 45 minutes 5 days a week. First grade is 45 minutes 3 to 5 times a week. Second grade ideally should be getting 45 minutes of playtime 2 to 3 times a week. They recommend the 45-minute time slot in order for children to engage in collaborative projects in depth. That way they are able to really get into their play situations. And that was actually something from the PROPELS acronym that we saw last week, was that extended time period that children are engaging in their play. Is being able to play for an extended time is an indicator of mature and high-level play. Down here it says extra recess, and I put a note that says extra recess refers to situations where only one recess is scheduled per day. That's usually around lunchtime. There are many schools and many grades where they get one recess at lunch. And so they recommend that a couple times a week kiddos get an extra recess during their day. I know at LU we have a second recess, and so that's really helpful. And I think throughout the district that is common, but I don't know that for sure. So here it says they recommend 45 minutes of free choice time multiple times a week for primary grades. This is time to practice those free choice routines. It's a time to establish positive rules built with the students. It is a time where you could choose a theme. So maybe this week we are doing a space theme, and whether you're in art or sand or Legos, your theme is space. Thomas Rendon and Gay Gronlund, they are the authors of Saving Play. They also noted that children do not immediately become engaged in play. And that's why 15 to 20 minutes is not a sufficient amount of time. They recommend 60 minutes of daily play in learning centers as well as recess. So not just 60 minutes outside, they're saying play in the classroom. and opportunities for movement throughout the learning day. So the point being, they need this time to play because they need time to think through, plan, and become engaged in their play situations to really reap the benefits. Now, if you're anything like me, you're thinking, when am I going to fit in 45 minutes of play? That is one of the barriers in using these strategies and using this free choice, because it's really hard to fit that in with all of our academic needs. So, teachers plan for play. This is from Saving Play. And these are direct quotes. And I liked them because they align exactly with Dr. Stuart Brown's principles of play. So it says, teachers who are successful in engaging children in high-level play experiences are planful. They are intentional. They think carefully about how to effectively build children's approaches to learning so that they can become deeply involved, use their imaginations and critical thinking skills, work cooperatively with others, and benefit from the play experience. Does this intentionality take away from the authenticity of play? No. Are all the properties of play still observable? Yes. Let's consider some of the properties in light of teacher planning. Play is still voluntary. Although there is a predetermined set of play experiences, even though you choose the station, the child ultimately chooses where they want to play and what they play with. The inherent attraction and continuation desire. The teacher considers ways to engage the children's interests as part of her planning so that the children perceive it as fun and want to keep playing. They still want to do it, and they still want to continue to do it once they start. Freedom from time and diminished consciousness of self. Teachers make sure ample time is available, that's the tricky part, in the daily schedule for children to get deeply involved in play. 45-minute to 1 hour blocks are recommended. So when the kids have enough time to engage, they get to feel that freedom from time, freedom from their self. I said it wrong in the last module. It's time flies when you're having fun. So, and finally, improvisation. Teachers are not necessarily planning what the children have to do with the materials available. In fact, they offer open-ended materials, like we talked about in the last couple slides, than those with one right use. So children have many opportunities to come up with their own ideas and use their creativity. One of the things that makes me think of was my second graders playing with Unifix cubes. They liked to create little sticks with patterns, and they would match these patterns. And so they'd make 4 blocks, and it would go red, yellow, yellow, black, red, yellow, yellow, black, and they'd line them up next to each other, and they called them potions. It was just incredibly creative because I let them play with blocks and didn't give them any instruction. So that improvisation is still there, even though I chose the materials. Well, I laid out the materials. Okay, teachers facilitate play. These are some things that you might see in play situations. Teachers know by observing children engaged in play. Teacher involvement in play is recognized as part of best practices in preschool and kindergarten and first grade and second grade. Teachers talk with the children. They're nearby the play centers. They watch closely to see what children are doing. They listen and hear what they say, and they're prepared to offer assistance. Teachers are not taking breaks during free choice time. They're not grading their part of it. Engaging in supporting play. They play alongside play, the play stations. They model and scaffold. They prompt and challenge, and they reflect with children about their play. So they talk with the kids. Some of the things they may see is dependence to independence. Children start to take risks rather than depending on the teacher. Like, how often do they ask for help? They start to do things on their own. Do they take initiative, or do they wait for another child to do something for them? The more they play, the more they're going to start doing things on their own. Repetitive action to creative innovation. Repetitive action is indicated by boredom. It's a lack of smiling, They're not using materials creatively. They don't stay engaged for very long. So if they're unfocused, say they're bored, if they're not smiling, not laughing, if they're not engaged, if they're not coming up with new ways to use materials, they're not engaged. The more that they get to engage with play, the more that they get those opportunities, the more they're going to move towards creative innovation, where they are using those materials and coming up with new ways. Poor self-control to self-regulation, you can watch the transformation. They may start out as noisy, destructive, aggressive. They may exclude others. They may be hurtful or mean. But once they move into that high level of play, the more opportunities they get to play, they're going to move into problem solving. Needing little assistance, they can change their behavior because they want to continue playing. Teachers can guide all of these transitions by supporting, facilitating, and following the children's lead and joining in. So if you see a kid is having a hard time, join in and play with them. And it can help you figure out how to move them from the dependence, from the repetitive action, from the poor self-control, to the independence in play, to the creative innovation in play, and to self-regulation. Your role as a teacher. So we've been talking about that. This is Mraz, Preselli, and Tyler's take on this. This is purposeful play, that many methods of instruction can help children think about their play in different ways. Mraz, Preselli, and Tyler, 2016 was the year they wrote this book. They outlined 4 methods to utilize in workshop structure. There's direct instruction that we know and love. I do, you do, we do. So if I'm teaching a new lesson, I might use direct instruction. Inquiry is used to teach something that is already familiar to the students. So the teacher might pose a question, ask students to generate ideas, knowledge, and questions about the topic. So if you are talking about bullying, something that they've heard a lot about, or how to invite a friend to play with them. Maybe you've talked about that before. You might talk about inquiry, use an inquiry take where the kiddos generate ideas. Storytelling is often used to help students relive an experience. Teacher will use circle time to tell a story with a teaching point, and the students get to join in the retell. So that would be something that you observe at recess or during a station, and you come back to circle time and you retell what happened. So if Lucy and John get into an argument about who gets to read the Elsa book, you can retell that story and invite the kids to talk about it. And then the teacher can either make the explicit point, or they can invite the children to come to a conclusion or a solution, or just share what they noticed or learned. And then finally is coaching, which is what happens in those conferences with students while they're playing. Those are those one-on-one or those small group discussions. This supports the play that's going on. It's quick words of advice and things for students to try while they're playing. So direct instruction, inquiry, storytelling, and coaching. And finally, we have Propels. So, as a quick reminder, Propels is planning, roles and rules, props, extended time frame, language, and scenarios. And those are those essential elements of play. And ways that you can use this is you can scaffold planning by asking the children what they want to play with and who they want to be. That's very simple. Encourage the children to discuss their choices and roles with their peers. Scaffold that planning by talking to the kiddos about their plans. Planning is actually much more powerful when it is drawn or written out. So that's something to consider with those younger kids who can't write, maybe letting them draw, just taking 1 or 2 minutes to jot down a sentence about what they want to do. Planning also happens when changes occur during play. So high-level play includes discussion of changes during that time. And that's something a teacher can scaffold in a play situation by stepping in and offering some advice. Roles and rules, teachers can scaffold by discussing what roles may be included in different situations. So if kiddos want to play it in a grocery store, but Lucy doesn't know what roles might be other than a shopper, a teacher can talk through that with them. And they can monitor and support students in maintaining those roles. So if I see that Lucy is the clerk, but she has decided to start cooking corn, I might help support the maintaining of her role as a grocery clerk, or help them to plan a transition into another game with those same props. Scaffold use of materials as substitutions by modeling. So I know that my daughter does this a lot, where she gets really stuck on she needs a specific tool, but maybe doesn't have it. So I might offer to her something else. Hey, can you use this stick and pretend it's a fork? She has a little bit of a hard time with that because she's 3. But in a classroom, you can model using objects as substitutions. You can also lead discussions about how materials might be used or what materials might serve a certain purpose. So if you brought up the Play-Doh for a day, you can start out by having a discussion about Play-Doh before they jump into it. Extended time frame is actually one that kind of comes inherently. Play situations become more complex and last longer the more practice they get and the more mature they are. So that's a harder one to scaffold, but by scaffolding the other things, they'll get there. Language. You can scaffold language by assigning names to props, depending on their use, and modeling sentence structure, vocabulary, and intonations of people doing different jobs. Back to the grocery example, I'm probably not going to be a checkout clerk calling someone my love or calling them by their first name. I'm probably going to talk very professional, and I would model that for the students. Whereas some kiddos might only have interactions with other peers and adults being their parents, who might call them honey. So trying to model what an adult in a different job might talk like. And finally, scenarios. You can scaffold those by building background knowledge of different settings, roles, and actions associated with the situations, play situations. Not every kiddo has background knowledge of how some materials can be used. So by modeling, practicing, or even inviting other kiddos to share ideas, you can help provide a variety of scenarios. Whew, so that was a lot. Again, you've been presented with how to prepare for play in your classroom. So, to apply what we've just talked about, and it was a lot, I have another Google document where you can describe how you might modify an existing lesson plan of any subject to incorporate play or utilize free choice workshop structure. Again, this document can be shared with me at my email. You can submit through Google Classroom. It's not graded. It's not shared with anybody. It's just me checking to see if the materials made sense to you. My resources are smaller this round. I have Elena Bedrova's article, Dr. Stuart Brown's book, Dr. Elkin's book, the Propels article, Purposeful Play, and Saving Play. So to show you the Google document that you will look at, it is in the Google Classroom, and you can click on Application of Learning. You can open up the document and a blank one will be created for you. And it says, how might you modify a lesson plan? You can put your subject, objectives, what materials you might use, what this lesson would look like. Oh, and I'm scrolling too much, what it might look like, then here is where you can put in a modification of how you would incorporate workshop structure. Any questions? If this feels like too much for you, I also put a box here where you can just share your reflections from the module, and that is totally fine. Just considering how you might incorporate that structure. I know the 45 minutes is a very long time, so just let me know your thoughts and reflections on utilizing free choice. Again, thank you so much for being part of Module 2, and we will get into social development in Module 3.